You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 88, with a very special guest. Dubbed as the maths teacher every student wishes they had in high school. So if maths is your teen's favorite subject, and especially if it isn't, definitely stay tuned. He's also a TED speaker, statewide maths curriculum leader, internationally published author of 2 books, and where it all started, the creator of WooTube. It's Eddie Woo. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Eddie. How are you? And thank you for being here today.
It's a real pleasure, Katie. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Now, I don't think there is a maths teacher in Australia who doesn't know who you are, but for any parents or students who don't know, can you just give us a quick bit of background, a quick summary of your work and who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I have been teaching mathematics for over 15 years now. I'm based in Sydney, and it's a thing that I know is what people who, as you mentioned, might know me for. Mathematics is the thing that I've taught professionally. I've been doing a lot of things, even in popular culture, like you said, releasing books or having, time on radio shows or TV. But actually, all of that is quite unusual to me from my perspective before work as a teacher, because the subjects that I enjoyed when I was at high school were not mathematics. They were actually English, history, and drama. That was the kind of kid that I was. In some ways, it's still the kid that I am. And I had every intention to become an English and history teacher when I went to uni. But I discovered that there was this chronic shortage of mathematics teachers across New South Wales. And then I realized it's nationwide and in fact all around the Western world. So that's the world I've inhabited since that time. And I guess probably what people might be familiar with me from is that, it's 2024, 11, 12 years ago now, I started filming my regular old classroom lessons with students in the room and, interruptions and bells and all the rest. I started doing that a few years ago because I had a student who was very ill and he was just missing class and he was immune compromised. And so rather than just give him a textbook and saying good luck, we wanted to be able to tailor his learning experience a little more even when he wasn't at school. That's where WooTube was born, and it's kind of amazing to know that's humble beginnings from where we are now.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is one of the things that really sort of hooked me onto you even more so was because, like you said, you had more of that background in humanities and English. And I can relate to that because I'm actually originally a geography teacher, kind of by trade, and from the UK, where we only have one specialist subject. So I moved over to Australia and then realized, everyone needs 2 specialist subjects. And I kind of commandeered maths as my second subject. So that's really interesting. And I wonder how you feel and like what perspective or insights can you offer as someone who maybe, naturally, let's just say, maybe that's not the right word, kind of has more of that humanities English side to them. Like, how on earth did you sort of transition to really get into maths? And obviously you have such a passion for it now, because we most likely, we know that there are students out there who maths doesn't feel like their thing either. So what message or what insights might you have for parents who have teens in that situation?
Yeah, it's a really insightful question, Katie, because I think that it's a really common experience for most of us to basically foreclose on the idea that we could comprehend or let alone be good at mathematics. And I think it's one of those, not the only subject, but it's one of those areas where if you have key challenges early on, maybe gaps in your learning, perhaps you moved jurisdictions, or maybe you just had a bad year one year, or things were going on, in your family life. I remember, for example, when I was in year 10, my mum was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so that sort of wreaked havoc on the later years of my high schooling. And as you can imagine, any young person going through something like that, that's going to impact their learning. And mathematics is a subject which is they actually say it is relentlessly hierarchical. And so if you can imagine a pyramid, you've got to have this strong foundation. And if you're not building on all of the pieces and all of the building blocks, then you're going to have some trouble later on. It's almost a sort of guarantee. And so a lot of us get to that point where we say, I'm missing too many pieces. It's too late for me, right? And to that, I would encourage people and say, at least autobiographically, I know that it's never too late, even though it's particularly challenging when at school because the maths syllabus, in fact, on most syllabuses, seem to move on like a train, whether we get on board at the station or not. And so I want to say to all the parents listening out there, actually, in some ways, you're in the perfect place for this because you don't have to sit any more tests. No one's pushing you to do exercise, this, that, the other. You can slow down, take your own pace. And the key thing I think that a parent out there who's listening needs to say to themselves is, I'm willing to give this a go. I'm willing to sit in that uncomfortable place because it's not an easy subject. It can be quite abstract. It can be full of concepts that take mental gymnastics just to wrap your head around. But we've got to be willing to get on that journey and be in an uncomfortable place in order to make any progress. So that's the first suggestion I would make. Explicitly call out for yourself. I'm going to give this a go. It's going to be hard, but that's not any different to, say, for instance, we're still at the start of the year as we're recording this. I'm sure there are some people who made New Year's resolutions to take their diet differently or their food, their exercise, all that kind of thing. It's like, well, you're going to be in an uncomfortable, sweaty, painful place for a little while, but that's where great change happens, right? So that's number one. And then secondly, to cap that off, I would say that, and this is something I've learned since becoming a mathematics teacher, mathematics connects to everything and everyone. It's just that those connections are not always obvious. And so whichever part of the world or learning that you as an individual naturally connect to, as you mentioned, geography versus, say, for example, English and drama, they're quite different to one another and they have different points of contact with mathematics. I know for me, this is going to be a strange thing for most people to hear because it's not an expected connection that you would make. But I actually think every mathematical concept, formula, lesson, idea actually shares something really fundamental with the most basic rule of storytelling, which every great movie, film, book shares in common, which is that there have to be at least three pieces to the puzzle. There's often more, but the three basic pieces are setup, conflict, and resolution. There has to be some orientation. If I'm watching a movie, I've got to know who the characters are and what's the world they inhabit. If I'm watching a movie and the director doesn't do a good job of establishing who is this person and why should I care about them, then I'm just going to fall asleep, right? But there also has to be some conflict, some kind of inciting incident, something that doesn't click or doesn't make sense or some challenge. And in mathematics, that's often a problem that we feel like is impossible to solve. How can we work out the effect of gravity on objects as they fly through the air? How is an apple, which falls to the earth, different to the moon, which just seems to stay up there suspended in space? That was what Isaac Newton was wrestling with when he invented the part of mathematics we call calculus. And then thirdly, there has to be a resolution. Every great character in a movie, they change or they learn a lesson themselves and they go through an arc and they develop and they mature and they don't end the movie in the same place as where they began. And so every great mathematical idea, it actually changes the way we look at the world just a little bit. And so once I realized, as someone who loves stories and characters and plot, that there was a connection between all the mathematics I wanted to learn and teach and that idea of telling a great story, I found a home in mathematics. And for everyone out there who's listening, there's going to be a different thread that they join, but there is one. Have confidence that there is and go and search for it.
I love that. And there was two things I just jotted down there as you were talking. And I think one of them being that three phases of, the setup, the orientation, the conflict, and the resolution. Like, I love how that translates to thinking about, a math problem. So setting it out, literally going through the conflict or the drama of trying to solve it and getting to an answer. And I will say, one of the things that just works so well for me in math is that, we have that kind of black, I know it doesn't happen for all parts of maths, but we generally have that. We can look up the answer in the book and if it's 7.2, it's correct or it isn't. And we get that black and white feeling. But I think also that sort of translates to, and I think you were touching on this, that this happens for the students. They see the problem, they tackle the problem, they go through that process of, as you mentioned a moment ago in a different context, like that discomfort. And then coming out the other side of it, if we can build that skill, if we can build that level of confidence and competence, then that builds for them as that character, if you like, as well. And I think that's really, really good. And the other thing that you mentioned, which I find myself saying so often as a phrase, is it's never too late. And I often talk about it from the student, talking about the students and going, like, it's never too late to learn, an element of exam technique that you can literally use the next day and it will change your exam result. It's never, so many parents come to me and their teen is in, year 12 or year 13, and they're like, oh, this sounds great, but I think it's too late. I'm like, it is not too late. Give me an hour. We will turn things around. And I like how you're talking about that in relation to the parents and how they might feel like, you know what, maths wasn't my thing, or I didn't do great with maths. So if they have a teen who either maybe is struggling, and I don't know whether this would be the same answer for both or not, you can let us know, a teen who is struggling in maths and they don't feel able to help them either, or maybe they have a teen who is a real whiz at maths, so they're doing really high level stuff and therefore they don't really feel able to help them. Do you have any sort of either practical, or it could be something a little bit more open, do you have any sort of strategies that they could use to help support their teen, even though they might not necessarily be able to literally solve the equation for themselves?
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. And I think that's a really relevant and practical question because in 99% of situations, especially in the domain of high school where I do most of my work, the mathematics that gets learned after even say year 8 is mostly forgotten by adults who are not going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. It's like, oh yeah, Pythagoras' theorem. Those names are somewhere kicking around my brain, but don't ask me what they mean. And so what you just mentioned of a parent coming to their child and saying, well, look, I can't solve this problem for you. What value can I add? For me, the most enduring sort of assistance and support that a parent can give to their child is to not try and pretend to be the expert and like, oh, here's how you do it. But in fact, to be a co-learner with your child and say, hey, this is interesting. I don't really understand this. Can you help explain this to me? And the reason why this is so powerful is that it works from both sides of the coin. So the two reasons why this makes a big difference to students is, firstly, it demonstrates to the child, to the young person, okay, even if this is something that's not naturally easy for my parent to take on, they're showing that it's worth putting the effort in. Because in fact, that comment that you mentioned before, Katie, which a lot of parents say in the most well-meaning way, like, I never understood maths. If what happens is, if that is followed up by saying, therefore, you, my beloved child, you don't need to worry about it, right? That is well-intentioned, but it's one of the most disabling things you can do to a young person to say, actually, here's an excuse, here's an easy out, just abandon this forever because I did too, and that's just your fate forever, right? So I think that being able to say, hey, yeah, it's not easy, but I'm going to sit beside you with this, and that takes patience and perseverance. And in fact, it's not just mathematics. I mean, I love science. I find it really fascinating, but because I just couldn't fit it into my pattern of study in years 11 and 12, I didn't take chemistry or biology or physics. I've just got this kind of old understanding of it, and I love my kids teaching me new things, and that curiosity, that interest is very powerful. And it's not just in the learning domain. I think all of us can speak to what a wonderful statement it makes to our children when we say, hey, I'm interested in what it is that you're talking about and what you're passionate and what you care about. So that's the first reason why it matters. It's a statement from the parent to the child. And then secondly, it's powerful for the young person themselves because it was the physicist Richard Feynman actually who said, you don't understand something truly until you can explain it simply.
This is where my brain was going as you were talking.
Right. And in the act of a young person starting to articulate, I'm trying to learn about cell mitosis, whatever that means, right? They actually start to put the pieces together in their mind of their own conceptual understanding. And that's really powerful. I think it's one of the reasons why teachers are often the best learners because we stand in front of the classroom all the time and we try and articulate and express. And sometimes we realize, oh, I don't understand this as well as I
I
thought.
don't actually know what I'm talking about.
It actually really does materially help the child to put them in the position of explaining as well. So it's a win-win.
Absolutely. I see that so often. And we all know it in ourselves. If we start going down a path and we're trying to explain something to someone or state it, what is it? If you can't kind of draw it in crayons, you don't know it well enough, that kind of thing. If we can't explain it to someone else, it is a sign that we don't know it well enough. So if you can get your teen to explain it and break it down in a way that you can understand it, especially if you're someone who it isn't your natural forte, like that is so valuable for them and their learning because it's consolidating it, it's breaking it down in their brain, it's making sure they can put the pieces back together in their brain. And obviously, so many math questions are all about that, you know, breaking something down, taking the steps, you know, showing all your steps if you're working. And that, well, that actually kind of brings me on to another question that I wanted to ask about. And this might be more to do with, you know, what you do maybe in the classroom and with your students. Do you have any maybe top tips or areas that you could share where you're helping your students actually, you know, prepare for assessment or prepare for exams? Are there any particular pieces of advice or things you advise them to do? Or, well, this could be a separate question, but I'll share it here. Maybe you can put those together. But also things that maybe you see students doing that they feel like, you know, oh, I feel like this is productive, or I feel like this is doing, but actually we know and we can see that that's probably not the best use of your time. So things, it's almost like things that you advise them to do or you help your students do. And are there things that we would sort of advise against or that are mistakenly seen as helpful, but maybe not the best use?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a rather uh diverse set of questions, which I'm going
I
to
know
try
we
and
can
go
break
all
them
into
down. So
one.
first
No,
one,
it's all good.
what might you get them doing? Like what can
Yes,
what do you help your
absolutely.
students to do in order to prepare well for their exams? And then we'll get to the second one.
Well, you are right, Katie, that's a great segue because the first thing I ask my students to do is I'd rather them do fewer questions, but get into the habit of actually explaining that to a peer, a parent, someone else who maybe doesn't know as much about that question, rather than just churning through a volume of questions. And there's actually this dangerous thing that can happen in mathematics where you can feel like you understand something because you can reliably get the right answer. You can check the back of the book and you're like, score 7.2 is exactly what I was supposed to get. You feel really
Well
happy.
remembered.
But one of the things, one of the challenges of that is that a formula or an algorithm can be implemented correctly and reliably and even quickly. We can reach fluency, which is a really important place to reach in mathematics, without really knowing why something ticks. And my favorite example of this is in my school, one of the things which I've been involved with is a program where Year 11 students, they offer peer tutoring for younger students who need help with their homework,
Yes.
essentially. And one of the most common questions that a Year 11 student will get from, say, for example, a Year 7 student is this long division thing. How does it work? I'm getting the wrong answer, right? Now, most of the Year 11 students who have volunteered for this program, they're pretty okay with maths. And even though it was a long time ago, they still remember, they can go through the motions and they can say, well, this is the right answer. But it is on the asking of the first question of, but why would you do that? I mean, why would you write the numbers here? And then why are you subtracting here, but you're dividing there? What on earth is going on? And Year 11 students will then have this epiphany that for years they've been doing this process, getting the right answer, but having no idea why, right? So I guess that just goes back to that idea of explanation. The second thing that I would suggest that's really important and is often underdone is about not just stopping when you have an answer to a problem, but saying, is there another way? One of the wonderful things about mathematics, you mentioned that there are a whole class of problems where there is just one right answer, but there is almost never just one way to get there. And one of the most delightful things about mathematics is the more approaches you take to solve a problem, the more insight you gain into that problem. And sometimes one solution actually tells you why another solution makes sense and why you can do that. And the other reason why it's important is because connecting different mathematical concepts together, it's one of the hardest things for students to do. And one of the best ways to develop that skill is to try and solve a problem and then push yourself to say, what other mathematics could I have used to solve this problem? It's a classic issue with the HSC when students do it in New South Wales, the high school certificate. That's your final leaving exam. It's this 3-hour toughest hurdles that the Education Authority can put up with. And one of the reasons why it's so enduringly difficult for students is precisely because it's at the end of 12, 13 years of schooling, right? One of the things that the HSC exam writers can do is they can say, okay, Katie, here's a problem for you, but it is not just confined to this one topic. I know you've encountered all these various topics, and so I can pose a question to you that requires 2 or 3 topics in combination. And that's something which isn't frequently encountered by students because, say, for example, they finish a unit on probability in Year 8, and then they get quizzed by their teacher on that one topic, and then they move on. So they don't realize, oh, this topic of probability actually has connections to other concepts and topics that I haven't encountered yet, you won't meet them until next year. But in the HSC, you meet them all in one go. So getting those multiple solution methods, I think, is really, really helpful.
I think that's a really, really good tip. And I think it's something we don't often think about. And like you say, there's various ways to get to the answer. So actually sort of use that as a way to build that knowledge, that understanding, that foundation, and the ways to apply all of those different concepts and methodologies. And you're absolutely right. Like so many students will struggle a little bit more with, especially, you know, the worded questions, or in the high level maths, the ones that do require different concepts from different strands of mathematics. You know, we talk about the complex, unfamiliar questions, and being able to see and work out, this is actually how I can go about solving this before we even, like, the solving part isn't always the hardest part. So I think that's really, really helpful. And again, I think it's really important to have students, as you mentioned, doing like the quality over the quantity. It's not about, oh, I've just managed to get through 20 practice questions. Were they pitched at the best level for you? Were they, you know, it's very easy to blitz through a whole load of questions. And it's great to build confidence, but I think there's also sometimes always like a false sense of security sometimes that can come from that. If we've just answered like I said, 20 questions, we've got them all the correct, we're like, yeah, done. And we're like, what about, like you said, those multi-step or multifaceted problems? And those are where often those big marks lie, right? So
Absolutely.
is there anything else that, you know, we haven't covered maybe in this discussion so far that you think would be really worthwhile, or you'd really love to share with some of our parents?
Yeah, well, Katie, one of the things you asked earlier, I just remembered was part of that cheeky multi-pronged question, was that there are a bunch of practices that are very common, but I find are roundly unhelpful actually to students. And it's often because there's a kernel of truth within them. And so we kind of fasten onto that, but then we do something which in some is actually counterproductive. And so one of the examples that I think of is that most people work out pretty quickly that mathematics is a practical subject, by which I mean the only way you can get good at it is by doing it. You can't read about mathematics. You just got to do the subject, attempt the problems. In that way, it's very similar to music or hospitality or PE, where you're doing a sport. It's like, well, you can't just read about this recipe. You've got to actually get into the kitchen and do it. So mathematics falls into that category. But the danger in recognizing that truth is that often students will say, okay, therefore, I'm just going to, you know, particularly as they get closer and closer to exam time, they're just going to burn the midnight oil. And adolescents are famously good at staying up late and sacrificing their sleep to maybe try and get another exercise or another practice paper in. And look, I want to applaud anyone who wants to work hard and persevere, especially if it's late. However, there's so many studies that have been done into the counterproductive nature of what we're doing cognitively when we deprive ourselves of sleep, and being able to make sure that we have good, well-established patterns of, okay, I have my regular revision time, and that's why I know that over the course of this number of weeks, I'll have put in the hours and I will not get to panic stations when I am the day before or the week before the exam. It's really important to have that balanced approach to life and to learning, and your brain is a part of your body. So if your body is not functioning well and you're not eating well or exercising and all those kinds of things, they're obviously going to have an impact on how you go in an exam. And so I would caution against the idea of, oh, you know what, I'm just going to absolutely push the way through. I'm going to cram this at the last minute. That's not the way the learning in mathematics actually is structured. You need your brain to change shape over time. And so that's why it's so important to have a regular and healthy approach, routine towards studying.
That's absolutely, like you said, so important. I'm so pleased you added that in. Yes, definitely. We want to think about, like, yeah, what is actually going to be detrimental? What is it that we might actually choose to do, but is actually going to take away from our performance and our well-being, our overall results, and how we feel for ourselves as well. That is so helpful. Thank you so much, Eddie, for your time and for sharing your experience and advice here today. I wish you and your students so much continued success. And if any of our listeners want to follow you or find your math lessons online or just find out more about you, where can they go? Where's best to go find you online?
Yeah, it's easy to look me up on a lot of social media platforms and all that kind of thing. But MrWootube.com, Mr. Mister is probably the easiest way to go to one spot. It's taken me years actually to do this, but every video I've ever put up onto YouTube, it's categorized by a topic. And so hopefully that's helpful to people.
Yes, and that is no small feat. I can totally relate to that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So Mr. spell in full, Mister, wootube.com. That is where to go find Eddie. Thank you again, Eddie. I really appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, Katie. Thanks.
Thank you. See you. And to everyone listening, have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care. Bye. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program, and I'll see you there.